Will America be great again, as Donald Trump has promised? He's defied the opinion polls and has clinched the US presidency. How has he managed it? And what will it mean for the United States and everyone else? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. He's never held political office, but now real estate mogul Donald Trump has been elected the 45th President of the United States of America. His victory over Hillary Clinton is being seen as the biggest political upset in recent American history. As expected, Trump won seats across the rural Midwest, but he also won several swing states, including Florida, Ohio and Pennsylvania. Trump's win ends almost 2 years of divisive campaigning from both candidates. His victory speech urged unity.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. Time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
Well, many people didn't see this coming. Almost all the polls said a Clinton victory was in the bag. So, how did Trump win? Alan Fisher reports.
Donald Trump's shock victory shows the businessman's ability to smash expectations and says a lot about the depth of anger in America against the established political structure and even the Republican Party itself.
It's good to be with you.
It's very hard to disentangle where the rage comes from, how much of it is kind of a white working class rage at losing their dominant position in the racial hierarchy, and how much of it is economic paranoia or legitimate economic fears given the lack of wage growth over the last 40 years.
Corrupt Hillary, corrupt Hillary.
He built his campaign in his own image, loud, brash and provocative. He's dominated US media for more than a year, and he attracted thousands upon thousands to his rallies across the country. The idea of a Trump presidential run rose out of the ashes of Mitt Romney's loss in the 2012 election. Within weeks, he trademarked the Make America Great Again slogan. When he launched his campaign, everyone got a taste of what was to come.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
He made remarks that would have sunk others. He insulted women, the disabled, war veterans and immigrants. He was slow to reject the backing of a white supremacist. It didn't matter. His support just grew. He won the Republican nomination, defeating 16 other candidates, including professional politicians who'd planned a White House run for years. They'd been reluctant to attack him, believing his campaign would implode and they'd pick up his support. But he just got stronger and stronger. He latched on to mainly white working class anger, people who saw everything around them change, and frustrated with politicians who did nothing to help.
He tapped into a lot of the frustration that many working class Americans experience, that many middle class, the diminishing middle class that they are experiencing. We're seeing the economy improve, but people are not getting jobs that are as high paying, or they're having to work multiple jobs. And so I think that is the frustration that he's been able to tap into, and that he has tapped into, and that propelled him to win the election.
Trump promised a return to more certain times, a return to American greatness, something that meant something different to everyone, but gave them a warm, nostalgic glow. Throughout the election, his campaign was dogged with many problems. His debate performances were poor, but he lost most support with the release of a controversial tape where he spoke about how he would sexually assault women and get away with it.
When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the you can do anything.
But in the end, more people wanted Trump with all his flaws, with all his bombast and anger. This was more than just a protest vote.
This is a change that they wanted. It may not have been the candidate they wanted, it may not have been the circumstances that they thought they would find themselves in, but what they wanted was something different than the status quo we've had for 8 years or for 16 years or whatever period of time they feel like America has been leaving them behind.
We will make America great again.
It was a campaign America has never seen the like before, but incredibly, it worked. And now America will have a president unlike any other. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Deanna Bass, a Republican communications strategist. From New York, Jeannie Zeno, professor of political science and international studies at Iona College. And also in Washington, D.C., Heather Hurlburt, former special assistant and speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Welcome to you all. I want to get on to what a President Trump will look like, what his administration will look like in a while. But first, let's discuss how he got there, how he won the presidency. Deanna, to what extent was it his outsider status that won Trump this election? The fact that he even ran against the powers within his own party?
I think a lot of it had to do with his outsider status, and I think you should look at both the Democrats and the Republicans to see candidates like Bernie Sanders. I was on the campaign trail for a year with Dr. Ben Carson. You know, even candidates like Carly Fiorina attracted Americans to support them who had never been a part of the political process, people who had never voted. So there was a populist groundswell in both, you know, the Democrats and with the Republicans, and I think that had a lot to do with what propelled Trump to, you know, having the keys to the White House.
Jeannie, what went wrong with the Clinton campaign? All the polls said right up until the polls actually closed, the voting booths closed, that she was going to win. How was her firewall breached? What went wrong? Did the campaign make tactical errors?
I don't think the campaign necessarily made technical errors. You know, they did what we all tell them to do as campaign strategists. You raise money, you get a ground game going, you make sure you're well organized, all the traditional things. But I think Deanna's right. What she doesn't have is she doesn't have an appeal at this time. It was not the right time for her. If you look at it, Donald Trump had the wind at his back. He was running against somebody who was looking for a third term of President Obama. We don't normally elect third terms of presidents in this country. He was running as a change agent. And when we looked at the exit polls last night, what did we see? Far and away, the number one thing that respondents or citizens wanted as a quality in their candidate was somebody who could change the system. They were very frustrated with what's going on in Washington, D.C. They wanted to send a message to the establishment, a message to Washington. All of those things that propelled to Trump and that also propelled to Bernie Sanders. I mean, you can imagine what would have happened had Donald Trump been facing Bernie Sanders. I think he would have a much more difficult time breaking that firewall, particularly in the Rust Belt when you're looking at a Pennsylvania or a Michigan or a Minnesota. It would have held in a different way that she simply couldn't hold it together. You know, you can look at issues like free trade, certainly, but there were other issues as well that people wanted something new, something different, and they wanted to send a message, and she was not the candidate to allow them to do that.
Jeannie, you said that it wasn't her time. It's unpalatable, but it's a question that I've got to ask. Is the fact that she's a woman, does that have anything to do with it? Was the United States ready for a woman president?
I don't think you can ever separate that out. Look, this was a campaign that from start to finish was gendered. We had so many discussions in this country about what it's like to be a woman in the workplace, like what it's like to be a candidate, how women are treated. So it certainly overlaid the entire campaign. We've got to give her the fact she's the first female nominee of a major political party. I guess we have to say now that Americans aren't ready for a female candidate or a female president, if you will, although I don't know if I would go that far. I do think it had more to do with her and what she represents, not necessarily as a female, but as a candidate. So if you're looking at her as an establishment figure, if you're looking at her from her policy perspectives, she was not selling something that the majority of the American public was willing to buy, at least the majority of the American public that came out last night if these numbers hold true. And again, we still need to look at the number concerning the popular vote in this case.
Heather Hurlbert, what does this result mean for the Clintons and their political dynasty now?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that I actually agree with everything that Deanna and Jeannie have said up to now, which is perhaps not what your viewers might be expecting from the three of us this morning. But, this election actually for both candidates represented the end of an era. You had two candidates in their late 60s, early 70s. And the future faces of both parties are going to look very different from what you saw in this campaign. And I think that speaks to the frustration that both Jeannie and Dina talked about, that, after America had a president who was perceived as young, who was perceived as new and different, and who then by the end of his term got to be perceived as not different enough or not different in the way that some voters wanted, there was a return, interestingly, by both parties to safe, familiar, although Trump not safe in the obvious way, but safe in that he's a very well-known public figure. And this will have been the ringing down of the curtain on the baby boomer generation and their influence in American politics. And that's certainly the case for the Clintons.
All right, we were talking with Dina about the fact that Trump is an outsider. I wonder why the DNC pushed so hard for Hillary Clinton to be their candidate when they had an outsider of their own, or someone who had outsider appeal in Bernie Sanders.
Well, I think there was both an expectation that because the economy was recovering and doing well, it would be a good time for an insider. And indeed, you have an incumbent president with 56% approval ratings. So this wasn't a totally crazy assumption on their part. The second point is that Sanders is, although he sounds great this morning, but Sanders' own personal history, the fact that he wasn't actually a Democrat and had no loyalty to the Democratic Party, the fact that he'd never run an election outside Vermont, had never been tested, had never faced the kind of opposition research that gets thrown at major party candidates in national elections in this country, he didn't look like a reasonable choice, the same way that much of the Republican establishment didn't think Trump looked like a reasonable choice. So, we go back to this outsider point.
Dina, I know you wanted to come in to say something there.
Yes, no, I agree. And I think that no one expected Hillary Clinton to get a run for her money from a 74-year-old socialist from Vermont. So I don't think anyone expected that. No one thought that he would have the heart of the millennials the way he did. And so this idea that the Democrats would put him up as their nominee against someone who probably, of course, no one thought Trump would be our nominee. So the potential would have been a Bernie Sanders against a John Kasich, a Bernie Sanders against a Marco Rubio, and because that's what we thought would happen on the Republican side. No one thought that Dr. Carson would make it as long as he did. No one thought that Donald Trump would, make it to the end. So, even now looking back, I'm sure that there are people like Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren who are, kicking themselves because they would have been better candidates than Hillary Clinton. And I think that we have to underscore the fact that she really was a flawed candidate, and Donald Trump certainly is a flawed candidate as well.
All right, a couple more questions on this before we move on to what a Trump presidency will look like. Dina, one of the demographic groups that has got a lot of attention is white voters without a college degree, male, who historically turn out in low numbers, but this year voted in even greater numbers for Trump, of course, than had been anticipated. How important was that group, do you think, in Donald Trump's election?
I think that population is probably the group that most people ignored in the beginning and didn't realize that they would turn out in the groundswell that they did. Certainly Donald Trump did a lot to appeal to that group, and a lot of his rhetoric was certainly not helpful in that way. But without question, the white male population in the kind of flyover states in the Rust Belt, that population certainly propelled Donald Trump to where he is now. But I think we also can't neglect, we have to look at the fact that Hillary Clinton was not able to build the Obama coalition. And that is, African Americans. She certainly got more of their support than Donald Trump did, but Donald Trump earned more support in the African American community than Mitt Romney did 4 years ago. So Hillary Clinton had to have a high 90s of black voter turnout, and she didn't. So as much as the white male vote was important, the black vote was important as well.
Jeannie, it was a pretty nasty campaign. What impact did FBI Director James Comey's decision to release his letter saying the FBI was reopening the investigation into Clinton's private email server have, do you think, on the outcome?
I think the email scandal as a whole really did taint the election against Hillary Clinton. And his decision in July, followed by the reopening that you just mentioned, then followed, just a few days ago by another closing of that investigation. I don't know that we have evidence yet that moved the needle for Donald Trump more than a point or two. But I do think what we're going to have to look at more carefully as we dig into these numbers is that one of the reasons that turnout, as was just mentioned, in some of these key Obama constituencies was down a little bit. And that turnout, the lack of turnout, really did impact Hillary Clinton, we think. And again, this is all preliminary because we're only a few hours out of this thing. We really have to dig in the numbers. But my guess is that we may have seen a small increase in favor of Donald Trump and a depression of the turnout that she needed to get her constituency and that Obama base out there.
Okay.
So I do think it did have an impact. More than anything, I think it reinforced what was the narrative of Donald Trump's campaign, painting Hillary Clinton as this establishment insider who can't be trusted, and it's business as usual if you elect her. And that's something that many people who went out to the polls yesterday really strongly rejected.
Okay, Heather, will progressives like Bernie Sanders, we've already discussed, Elizabeth Warren, will they distance themselves now from the Democratic Party, or do you think that they will take it over?
Yeah, there's no distancing. What there is instead going to be is quite an internal fight for control of party organs, party platforms. What does the Democratic Party represent now? And there'll be a ferocious internal debate of, does the party try to appeal more to the non-college white male demographic that you and Deanna were talking about a moment ago? Or does the party try to turn back to these folks that we were just talking about who seem not to have turned out this time? Is there a way to do both? I think there will certainly be some in the party who perceive, no, there's not a way to do both. And just to note that before the election, looking at the polling that at one point had quite a Clinton landslide, there was a lot of talk about the Republican Party splitting up. And there was not much talk about this huge fissure within the Democratic Party. And I think what you're now going to see is intense pressure on the Democratic Party, where there will also be intense internal pressure in the Republican Party, because, of course, this was not a party that went to this election united. But there's nothing like victory and controlling all three houses, all three branches of power, to kind of smooth over those tensions for a while. So we're gonna see intense forces within both parties, but the uncomfortable spotlight will shift to the Democrats for a bit.
When Donald Trump enters the White House in January, he'll be backed by a Republican-controlled Congress, as we've just heard. They have the power to appoint a new Supreme Court judge, tipping the bench in favor of Trump. And there hasn't been a US government this uniform since the 1920s. Here are some of the policies that Trump may try to push through. He wants the Mexican government to pay for a wall along the southern border of the United States. Trump's promised a deportation force to kick out migrants who don't have visas, and he wants to screen refugees who apply for asylum. Trump has said that he'll appoint a Supreme Court judge who may overturn the Roe versus Wade decision, which legalized abortion in the US. The president-elect wants the US to rethink its relationship with NATO, and he's against international trade agreements, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which is a major policy of President Barack Obama. Dina, I saw you shaking your head slightly there. What is the Trump presidency going to look like? What can we expect from him in the first 100 days?
Well, he has presented some of the things that he wants to do in the first 100 days. I believe that Donald Trump certainly has raised the issue of illegal immigration, but his idea of actually deporting 12 million non-documented or illegal immigrants, whatever the PC word is of the day, that's not going to happen. Now, the idea of actually deporting 2 million who are, who have committed crimes in the U.S., who are criminal, then that is something that many people can wrap their their minds around, but 12 million, that's just not going to happen. The idea of building a wall, many candidates have proposed different types of border security, and it includes everything from Hillary Clinton having said, called it a fence. Dr. Carson has talked about different levels of surveillance, increasing border agents on the border. So I do think that because he has made illegal immigration such a hallmark of his candidacy, that something will happen in in curbing illegal immigration.
Jeannie, he made a lot of promises on the campaign trail. How long has he got before this tide of support that brought him to the presidency begins to wane? I mean, as Dina was saying, he's not going to get everything done that he's promised.
Nobody ever gets everything done they promised, and I think Donald Trump's biggest challenge right now is to try to bring the country together after a very bitter and bruising campaign. I don't think we've seen it this divided in many election cycles. So I think his first job, and I think we heard him start to try to do this last night in his speech, is to try to invite and bring people together, people who did not vote for him and did not support him, both Democrats and people within his own party, because he's got some challenges there as well. He does not have a resounding victory or a resounding, mantle to move forward, if you will. He's going to have to work to piece that together. And if he wants to get these things done, he's going to have to work with Congress. Now, he has the benefit of having a Republican Congress, but let's not forget, he also has made some waves with many of the leaders in that Congress. The question today is Paul Ryan going to stay on as Speaker of the House? How is Donald Trump going to work with the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell? These are big challenges he's going to face because, of course, he wasn't elected king. He was elected president, and presidents have to work with Congress. And I would also just step back and say, because I was so glad Heather mentioned it, we got this so wrong, so many of us in this business, that a lot of talk before last night was that the Republican Party, was it going to be dismantling? Was it doomed forever? And we wake up this morning, and in fact, it's not doomed, but it's probably the strongest it's been in a long time, not just at the federal level where we're control all three branches in the very near future, but also at the state and local level where it's controlling 3/4 of the state legislatures and the governorships. This is a very strong party with a deep bench that didn't itself think it could capture the White House and magically did last night. And it's going to move forward, and I think it's going to leave the Democrats with an awful lot to think about.
All right, Heather, we'll give you the final word to you. You heard what Jeannie was saying there. He's going to assume power, the Republican-controlled House and Senate. There's a Supreme Court vacancy to fill. Many Republicans have refused to back him, though. So how easy or not is it going to be for President Trump to deliver on his promises?
Some things will be very easy, like appointing an anti-choice Supreme Court justice. Some things that are core Republican priorities will be very easy. On many of the tougher issues that we've raised, like immigration, like trade, this is going to be a sort of district by district assembling new coalitions. As Jeannie said, this morning's Republican Party is very strong, but it's not yesterday's Republican Party. So I expect a President Trump to focus on things that he can accomplish through executive orders in his first 100 days. On illegal immigration, on the one hand, the pace of deportations is actually the highest it's ever been under President Obama. But there'll certainly be something that looks like or that tries to communicate to the American people we're doing yet more on the security side. Similarly, on a number of the cultural issues he's talked about, the big things he said he would do, he can't do without Congress, but there are executive branch things that he can do. So,
like
smart
what?
presidential.
Give me a quick example, because we're rapidly running out of time. The difference between the executive and the big. I assume by a big thing you're talking about the Mexico wall.
Right. So the Mexico wall, you're going to wait until the Mexicans promise to pay for it, which they aren't going to. But you can grind the process, for example, of accepting immigrants and refugees to a halt. If you chose, you could walk in and just make it that no more refugees move through the process into the United States. You can reverse policies that pay for family planning assistance to women and girls around the world. That's something that Republican presidents traditionally do their first morning in office. You can, as I said, announce that you're going to appoint a Supreme Court nominee who fits Republican values. Those are all sort of easy, quote unquote, first 100-day things that any Republican president can do and that Trump surely will do.
OK, there we're going to have to leave it. Many thanks indeed. Dina Bass, Jeannie Zaino and Heather Hurlbert. And thank you for watching this special edition of Inside Story. We're going to leave you with some pictures of Donald Trump as he becomes the 45th President of the United States. I should say President-elect. He doesn't assume office, of course, until January. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. Go to our Facebook page for further discussion at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or join the conversation on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.